Welcome everybody to Builder 411. I'm your host, Mike Eccles, and today we're going to talk about how you frame a door opening. Whether that be an interior or exterior door, they pretty much frame the same. And so we're going to talk a lot about those and the components that go into that. Secondly, we'll follow that up with how you frame in your window, because really both processes are somewhat similar. And if you're ready, I'm ready, let's get started. Welcome, I'm your host, and today I'm going to talk specifically about doors, how you frame those doors, and the components of framing those doors, and then we're going to move on to windows. So let's start with some general terminology about a door. In this project right here is brand new construction, but if you're just doing a remodel, the process is still the same. You still got to have these components. So let me take a minute and talk about these components. You have a top plate, you have king stud, a cripple, and a header. All four of those components very important to framing up this door. If this was a remodel, you would cut the sheetrock back to right here. I personally would probably cut it back to this stud right here if I was going to put in a new door for this opening. So that way I would make sure all the wood in that area is good and it's strong, because I don't want my door sagging and I don't want to have problems with it. So if I was doing a remodel, again, I would come back to here. But this is not. This is a new construction. A few things to think about before you start framing. You've got to know what size door you're going to have. Now, typically, the standard size for the exterior of your home is a 34 or 36-inch door. Most builders put a 36-inch door in the front and a 34-inch door in the back. I prefer a 36 in the front and a 36 in the back. The reason for that, if you need to move in furniture, you've got room to get that furniture in and out. If you start putting a 32-inch door on the rear, or on your rear, or on the front of the house, then when you try to get furniture in and out, it makes it tough. So that's just something for you to think about. I would go with 36-inch doors. On your interior, 30, 32-inch, I like to put 34-inch doors. I like wide openings, especially if you got someone that's handicapped and is wheelchair bound. You may go as wide as 36 inches interior. And so just really think about your openings and what you're going to do with your home when you start thinking about size. But for this application right here, this is going to be a 36-inch door, and then the standard height for a door is 6 foot 8 inches. And by a tape measure, that's 80 inches. So now we know what this opening needs to be. We need to frame it in for a door that's 36 inches by 80 inches high. Now, this is going to make a little more sense to you here in a minute, but here's how you do that. So if your door is 36 inches wide, you need to add 5.5 inches. So in our application, 36-inch door, adding 5.5, we have 41.5 inches is what our rough opening needs to be. 80-inch door, we need 2 inches, so we're going to add 2 inches to 80, that's 82. So our rough opening needs to start out with those measurements. So now let's build this out. Typically, this wall is laying on the deck right here when you're building this, and so you start with the cripple studs. And this is a cripple stud, and this is a cripple stud like I showed you earlier. So those cripple studs are going to be at that 41.5 inches. Now, if you kind of look, your header sits inside of that, so your header is going to be 41.5 inches. That's why I say you add 5 inches to it. Now, how thick does your header need to be? In other words, thick this way. This is a 4-inch header. You could very well have a 6-inch header, could have an 8-inch header. Anything above 8-inch header, typically you move on to get a laminated beam for that area. But in most doors, a 4-inch header is good enough. It covers a distance from 48 inches, okay? We said our opening was going to be 41.5 inches, so we're not beyond that 48 inches, so a 4-inch header will work. If we was outside that 48 inches, then we would want a 6-inch header. Now let's talk about the header for a minute. We know our header needs to be 41.5 inches because it sits inside the king studs. From one inside of that to that one, that's 41.5 inches. We're going to make a 4-inch header. So what we need to do is cut two 2x4s at 41.5 inches, and then we need to get a piece of 1/2-inch plywood, cut it 3 3/4 and 41.5 inches. So basically, you're taking a 2x4 and a 2x4 and putting a piece of plywood in the center, and you're sandwiching that together to make your header. And then the best thing to do is just put nails, if you got a nail gun, is just nail those together, and that holds that header all together. That reason for that is if you just take two 2x4s and you put them together, then those are not going to be thick enough to account for the thickness of this wall right here, this cripple studs. And so when you try to finish this wall out and you try to put sheetrock up here, then that's going to be inset by about 1/2 inch. And that's not going to work for you when you're trying to put a piece of sheetrock up there. So that's why your header has to have that piece of laminated between them of that 1/2-inch plywood. So now that you build your header, and it's 41.5 inches for our opening, then we need to put these cripple studs in. Now keep in mind, our cripple studs have to be 82 inches to here. That's from the bottom of the floor to here. Now here's where it gets a little bit complicated. And I'm really not trying to confuse you here. But when you're building this wall on, you still have your bottom plate and a top plate. All right? So the bottom of this cripple stud is actually sitting on top of your bottom plate. So you have to account for that. So if you made this 82 inches right now, when you were building this on the floor, when you set it up, you're going to be 1 3/4 too high. So instead of being 82 inches, you're going to be 83 3/4. And that's going to be way too high to get your door in there and frame it right. So what you have to keep in mind when you're going to put this in there is that you have that bottom sill plate to remove. Once you put that wall and you stand this wall up, you're going to cut that bottom sill plate out. And that's going to account for 1 3/4. So when we do this cripple stud, we have to allow for that. So we're going to be at 80 1/4 on top of that plate. And that's going to make us finish out 82 inches. One easy way to make sure you don't make a mistake is just go from the bottom of your bottom sill plate, the very bottom of it, and measure up 82 inches and put you a mark right there. That's the easiest way. And then you need to know that that cripple stud has to come at 82 inches. Understand what I just said? Your bottom sill plate's here. You're going to measure from the bottom of your sill plate up 82 inches. This is where people make a big mistake, and that's why I'm kind of spending a little time on it here, is they'll build that out, and then this is going to be 1 3/4. Then they have to come back in, cut this all out, and move it down. So just remember, on new construction, you have an 1 3/4 bottom plate that you're going to remove from this doorway whenever you do that. So when you put these cripple studs in, just make sure at the bottom you allow for that. And if you do that, you're going to be fine. Let me just wrap up the doors here for a minute. A couple things to remember. You only have a little bit of room between this cripple stud and this cripple stud and your header in order to frame in your door. There's just a very little room to plumb that door. So what is important when you start to build this out is that this king stud and this king stud is in there plumb. If you put those in plumb, then your door, when you put these cripple studs in, it's going to be plumb. And that's very critical. The second thing I want to bring up is your header. Your header doesn't go on the inside of your cripple studs. If you nail it in here, that weight from above is eventually going to bend those nails and come down. That header has to sit on top of the cripple stud. So that way, when that weight does come down on it, it's supported by the cripple studs and the header, and you won't get no sagging. So those are two main components that you have to remember. Make sure your king studs are plumb, and make sure your header is sitting on top of your cripple studs, not but in the side. Now, I'm going to reposition the camera, and we're going to talk about windows. Okay, guys, so we've repositioned the camera now, and we're at a window. And so I want to talk about the same components like I did for the door for this window. We have the header, top plate, king stud, cripple, bottom plate. Same process, just like you did the door. You've got to determine your rough opening. In order to do that, you're going to have to know what size your window is. So let's start with the width. You pick your window out, and let's say our window is 32 inches wide. In other words, from this sash, right here, it's hard to see, I know, and from this sash, it's 32 inches. Well, like the door, if you remember, we took our door opening and we had a 5.5. We're not going to do that with a window. We're going to measure from sash to sash, outside edge to outside edge. Now, a window comes with the outside flange. You're not measuring from flange to flange. You're going to do from the interior sash to the interior sash on the width. And this window's 32 inches. So now we need to allow for this cripple stud, and some room in there to plumb that window. So typically we're going to add a 1/2 inch to plumb that window, plus the 3.5 inches you got for an inch and 3/4 stud here, an inch and 3/4 stud here. So that's 4 inches on a window. 5.5 for a door, but 4 inches on a window. That is the width of our header. So in this case, we have a 32-inch window in here. We're adding 4 inches to that, so we know that header is going to be 36 inches across there. And once we decide that, we already know that our king studs, from the inside measurement, from that king stud to this king stud, is going to be 36 inches. Then once we do that, we come in here with our cripple studs. And our cripple studs, this is where you get subjective. Some people say that no more than 12 inches down with your header. Some will go 18 inches. A lot of it's going to depend on your preference, how long that window is. The longer the window, the more you need to make sure it's closer to that top plate. So this is something you can kind of play around with. Somewhere between 12 to 16 inches is where the bottom of this header needs to be. And again, it's a preference thing. And really how long that window is. If it's shorter, you don't want this window to sit down here. You get what I'm saying? You don't want that header down here where that window's way down here. You don't want that. That would just look in your construction. So you want to make sure you stay about, I say 10 to 12 inches is about as low as you want to go with that header. Now I will tell you, in some bathrooms, if the window's a little smaller window, I have come down as far as 18 inches. But in most cases, you're going to be somewhere, that bottom of that header is going to be somewhere between 10. That needs to be your starting point for your top sash. So if this window, again, is 32 inches, you're going to go from that header height down 32 inches is where you want that bottom header to go in there. This header, this bottom sill plate, some guys will actually build that out with a 2x6. I don't do that. Different builders do it a little bit different. If you notice, I just put another header in the bottom here. Now, mind you, this header has no weight. Some guys will take these and make cripple studs to the inside right here to put that on. And that's perfectly fine as well. What I usually take in consideration is, where's my sheetrock going to fall? Here. Is it going to fall here? If it was going to fall right here, I'd make sure there's a stud right there, because where that seam is for that sheetrock is important. It's all about laying it out. Some guys, like I said, builders will come in here and put another cripple stud here and another cripple stud right here, and then determine if this is my corner over here, then I come over 48 inches and I put another coming in right here to cover my seam. And that's all I did here. Is I came from here to there. That's going to be 48 inches. I wanted to cover the seam. And what I mean by cover the seam, that's where the sheetrock or my finished interior product, whatever I decide to use, needs to be 48 inches. So those sheetrock is going to come in 4 foot wide. And so you have to have something behind that sheet to keep it sturdy. So you don't want a seam to hit right here and go down. Then when you try to seam that, it's going to keep cracking. It's not going to seam right. So that's what I mean by, when you're building these windows out, you got to think about where the seam's going to be, because it's going to be important to where that sheet is going to land. So typically, if you're building from that corner or this corner of the room, you just want to measure over where 48 inches is and make sure you got a stud there. So that way that sheet has a seam to lay on. In this case, that window is down right at about 10 inches is where we made that window. And then we came 32 inches below that, put in our bottom sill plate. And in this case, I used another 2x4. But like I said, some guys don't do this. Some builders don't do this. On newer builds now, what happens is that sheetrock goes right here and it covers over that next sheetrock. And so there is no wood seal in there anymore. Now, if you notice, I got a piece of plastic in here. And this is really important on aluminum windows. Aluminum specifically. What happens is this window will condensate. Doesn't matter. The hot and cold is going to transfer. It condensates on the inside. And so moisture gets trapped in behind the sheetrock. And it runs down and it gets on this bottom header. And then what happens is, over time, that starts to rot out. And so there's a couple different products that I like to just use plastic. Some of us older builders will use tar paper and put on there. But there is actually a membrane that you can buy. It comes really designed for the roofs, is where it started to play in. But you can cut that up and put that in there. But you just need something to protect that bottom seal so that water, when it sits there, it will give it time to evaporate out of there rather than rot out that bottom seal. There you have it. The main thing to remember, what size door are you going to do? What size window? Because that determines framing. Now, like I talked about, this is new construction here. If this was a remodel, I would make sure I cut my sheetrock back to here anyway. That's typically what you're dealing with before I put that all in so I could put my king studs in and my cripples in and my windows, and then I'm going to re-sheetrock this when I'm done on my remodel. But on a new build, it works the same way. So it doesn't matter. The main thing is knowing your size, the size of your door and the size of your window, and then what that opening has got to be. And I gave you the numbers and how to do that. Do you understand what a king stud is? A header and a cripple. And then remember that you have to put those supports in there because most of your exterior walls is a low burn wall, like I showed you when I was doing the door. And if you do all that, when you get ready to set that door, there should be just a little bit of wiggle room in there for you to plumb that door on the hinge side. And it will go in there fine and be real easy to do. If you don't do it the way I just explained it, what you're going to find out is then you have to go back in and cut your opening and move your opening because you didn't plumb it right. Same way with the windows. Just make sure you take your time when you're putting in the king stud because everything's being built off of this king stud. And if you put the king stud in plumb, then the rest of your build is going to be plumb. And that's what's important when you're putting in doors and windows. I hope that you found this very informative to you. If you did, please do me a favor, share me some love. Until next time, I'll keep teaching, you keep building.